The Midnight Truck. During a dark, foggy night in a small Anatolian town, an old legend stirred back to life. For generations, hushed voices spoke of a cursed truck that appeared on desolate roads at the stroke of midnight, a vehicle whose very presence foretold doom and despair. It was said that this truck carried a burden far beyond any ordinary cargo, a relentless curse born from a tragedy long past. One fateful evening, young journalist Semra and the town's weathered farmer Hassan, driven by equal measures of curiosity and sorrow, set out to uncover the truth behind the midnight truck. As midnight approached, a dense fog rolled in, cloaking the narrow road in an eerie silence. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, Semra moved cautiously along the path, while Hassan, whose many years had taught him the language of misfortune, followed closely. The calm was abruptly shattered by the low rumble of an engine. Out of the mist emerged the unmistakable silhouette of an ancient truck. Its headlights, harsh and piercing, cut through the gloom like jagged spears. The truck's faded paint and rusted metal told a tale of decay and loss, echoing the sorrow of a past filled with unspeakable tragedy. This was the midnight truck. It moved as though possessed by its own will, steadily advancing along the roadside. Hassan recalled a grim story. Once, the truck had carried living souls until a catastrophic accident claimed their lives. Their spirits, burdened with regret and grief, were said to have become trapped within the vehicle, doomed to haunt the lonely highways each midnight. With every step closer, the pair could almost hear the echoes of past misjudgments and the cold breath of death emanating from within. Semra meticulously recorded every detail: the trembling light of the flashlight, the soft clatter of metal, and the deep, resonant hum of the engine as they neared the truck. The beam of the flashlight revealed a faded sign on its side, "Burden of Death." Hassan's eyes filled with memories of bygone sorrows as he murmured that the truck was not merely a transporter of goods, but a vessel of pain, sorrow, and an unyielding curse. A chill wind swept around them as they approached the truck, heightening the sense of foreboding. With trembling hands, Semra slowly opened the creaking door. A gust of stale, cold air rushed out, carrying with it the heavy scent of forgotten anguish. Inside, the truck was a time capsule of despair: dust-covered seats, shattered glass, and remnants of lost lives scattered about. In one corner, an old radio, still faintly operational, played a somber tune that seemed to mourn the lives once held within the truck's confines. But as abruptly as the music began, it died, leaving only a deafening silence. Without warning, a shadow moved near a broken window at the back of the truck. In a moment of paralyzing dread, a gaunt figure emerged. Its eyes, hollow and filled with ancient sorrow, met theirs as it whispered in a broken tone, "Let me go." The plea resonated with the weight of countless lost souls, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Hassan's voice, heavy with regret and compassion, offered reassurance. They meant no harm and only sought to ease the suffering of those bound to the curse. Yet, the wind swallowed his words, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. As they ventured deeper, the truck revealed more of its tragic history. Faded photographs of smiling faces, now etched with melancholy, lined its walls, and every creaking sound and shifting shadow recounted a story of despair. Amid this haunting tableau, a faint light began to glow from within the truck's depths. Drawn to this mysterious beacon, Semra and Hassan discovered a weathered journal hidden in a forgotten corner. Its fragile pages chronicled a family's descent into tragedy, a father's remorse, and a series of fatal missteps that had doomed them all. The final, chilling lines read, "At midnight, sins are paid for. Souls find peace or are condemned to endless darkness." Confronted with the weight of this revelation, the pair realized that breaking the curse might only be possible by facing the very sorrow that had chained these souls to the truck. With hearts full of both fear and determination, they resolved to embrace the painful truths of the past. Outside, the truck's flickering headlights seemed to acknowledge their resolve as they prepared for a final act of compassion. As dawn began to break, the truck slowly started to move again. This time, its departure was different. It left behind an atmosphere heavy with the promise of healing. In the soft light of early morning, Hassan and Semra met in the town square, their souls touched by the night's revelations. The legend of the midnight truck was forever transformed. No longer was it just an omen of death, it had become a symbol of redemption, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, confronting one's past can lead to a hopeful new beginning. Thus, on that eerie night, when the tormented spirits finally had a chance to find rest, the midnight truck transcended its legacy of doom. It became an enduring testament to the power of courage, forgiveness, and the unyielding human spirit, a beacon reminding all that even in the blackest of nights, light can be found. Chased by the ghost truck. The night was unusually silent as Daniel drove down the narrow, winding road of Blackwood Pass. The trees loomed like silent sentinels on either side, their gnarled branches clawing at the moonlit sky. In the distance, a dense fog rolled in, obscuring the edges of the asphalt. Something about the night felt off, as if the darkness itself had secrets to whisper. It began with a glimpse. Daniel's tired eyes caught a flash of red in his rearview mirror. At first, he assumed it was just the reflection of another vehicle's taillights. But then, the headlights appeared too bright, too cold, like beams from another world. The truck, an old, rusted model with a faded logo that he couldn't quite make out, seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Its engine growled with an eerie vibration that resonated with the pulse of the night. Daniel's heart pounded as he pressed down on the accelerator, convinced that it was nothing more than a stray truck lost in the darkness. Yet, each time he glanced back, the truck remained impossibly close, a dark mirror reflecting his own racing fear. As minutes turned to an eternity, the truck began to mirror his every move. When Daniel slowed down, the truck decelerated. When he sped up, it accelerated in tandem. There were no other vehicles in sight, no streetlights to guide him, only the relentless, ghostly pursuit of this otherworldly machine. Its presence seeped into the car, a spectral force that crept under the skin and sent shivers down his spine. Desperate to escape, Daniel veered off the main road onto a rough, uncharted path cutting through the forest. Gravel crunched beneath his tires as branches whipped past, and the engine roared as if in protest. Yet, no matter how wildly he steered or how many turns he took, the ghost truck remained unwaveringly behind him, a silent, spectral predator. In a moment of frantic clarity, Daniel recalled an old legend from his youth, a tale of a truck cursed by a catastrophic accident decades ago on these very roads. Drivers had whispered of phantom figures, ghostly cries, and a truck that reappeared on stormy nights with an engine echoing unholy power. Locals had dubbed it the ghost truck, a harbinger of doom for those who dared travel alone at night. The uncharted road led Daniel to a desolate, abandoned service station hidden deep in the woods. Flickering neon signs and rusted pumps were all that remained of a bygone era. He pulled over, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, and decided to hide among the shadows, hoping to lose his pursuer. Silence fell as the truck came to a stop just outside the station. The air grew frigid, and the smell of burning rubber and decay filled Daniel's nostrils. Through the shattered glass of the station's old diner, he saw a figure, a man in tattered overalls, his face obscured by shadow, standing silently by the door. For a brief moment, Daniel thought he detected sorrow in the man's eyes, a silent plea for help or a warning to turn back. Then, with a groan mimicking the sound of a dying engine, the ghost truck roared back to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. Forced to confront the horror head-on, Daniel stepped out of his car. His legs felt numb, but he had no choice. The spectral truck idled ominously behind him, a reminder of past sins and unquiet spirits. The man by the diner stepped forward, and as he drew nearer, Daniel noticed a faded inscription on his shirt, James. In a trembling voice laden with regret and despair, James recounted the tale of that fateful night decades ago, a night when a reckless decision had led to tragedy. As the driver of the ill-fated truck, James had borne witness to a storm that turned catastrophic, leaving lives shattered. Racked with guilt and unable to forgive himself, he had vowed that his spirit would never find rest. Now, cursed to wander the night, the ghost truck was both his penance and his burden, a spectral embodiment of his remorse. "I am doomed to chase those who remind me of my failures," he whispered, his voice echoing in the cold night air. "And tonight, it seems, fate has chosen you." Despite his terror, Daniel's resolve hardened. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the truck's growing roar. James's eyes shone with a desperate sorrow as he revealed that the key to breaking the curse lay hidden in the wreckage of that long-forgotten accident. Beneath the rubble of the station, in a locked storage room, lay a small, silver locket wrapped in a faded scarf, a relic that once belonged to his daughter, the only reminder of hope in his haunted life. With little time as the truck's engine bellowed outside, Daniel nodded. "Show me where it is," he said, bracing himself against the chill of fear and determination. James led Daniel through a maze of decaying structures behind the service station. The corridors, dark and littered with broken glass and rusted metal, echoed with memories of pain and loss. Finally, they reached the storage room with its door hanging askew. Inside lay remnants of a forgotten era, dusty crates, yellowed newspapers, and, at the center, the delicate silver locket. Daniel picked it up, feeling the weight of decades of sorrow and regret in his hands. The locket was intricately carved, etched with patterns and a tiny inscription in a language long lost to time. Just then, the ghost truck's engine bellowed outside, as if protesting their delay. Knowing time was running out, Daniel and James hurried back to the service station, where a small, neglected cemetery lay at the edge of the property. Tombstones, worn by time and neglect, jutted out of the earth like silent witnesses to forgotten tragedies. James guided Daniel to a modest grave marked by a weathered stone bearing the name Emily. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay, yet carried an undercurrent of peace, a promise of closure. With trembling hands, Daniel opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a young girl with bright, hopeful eyes, a moment frozen in time, a reminder of innocence lost and love unending. "Place it here," James urged softly. Kneeling by the grave, Daniel gently set the locket atop the headstone. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, as if in response to an unspoken prayer, the wind began to whisper through the cemetery, carrying with it soft strains of a lullaby. The sound was both haunting and tender, a final farewell from a soul finally at peace. In that moment, the ghost truck's relentless roar faded into silence, its spectral form dissolving into the mist until it became nothing more than a distant memory. James stood silently, tears glistening in his eyes, as he watched the truck vanish like a nightmare at dawn. Daniel remained by the grave long after the echoes of the truck had dissipated. The terror of the chase, the supernatural pursuit, and the burden of witnessing a restless spirit's plea for redemption had left an indelible mark on his soul. Yet, in the darkness of that cursed night, he had discovered a sliver of hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming horror, compassion and courage could forge a path to redemption. The legend of the ghost truck would live on in the whispers of the wind and the rustle of the trees along Blackwood Pass. For Daniel, the night had changed him forever, a man who had stared into the abyss and emerged with a story destined to haunt and inspire those who dared to listen. The bloody truck route. The cold wind howled through the dark highways of Montana as Jake Turner, a long-haul trucker, adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. The CB radio crackled with static, and the road ahead stretched infinitely into the night. He had been driving for nearly 10 hours straight, exhausted but determined to finish his route before dawn. Then, the voice came through the radio. "Hey, buddy, you out there? You talking the old Route 77 tonight?" The voice was gruff, but there was an underlying edge of nervousness. Jake hesitated before pressing the button. "Yeah, why? You might want to turn back. Ain't safe this time of night. Weird things been happening." Jake frowned. He had heard the old trucker legends about Route 77, a desolate stretch of road that had gained a reputation for being cursed. Drivers reported strange lights, phantom hitchhikers, and even trucks that vanished without a trace. But he had never believed in those stories. "I got a job to do," Jake replied, shaking his head. The radio fell silent. As he continued down Route 77, an eerie feeling settled in. The darkness seemed deeper, almost swallowing the faint glow of his headlights. He checked the fuel gauge, half a tank left. It was enough to get him to the next station. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the road. Jake slammed on the brakes. His truck skidded slightly, and he braced himself. When he looked again, the figure was gone. Heart pounding, he exhaled sharply. "Just fatigue. I'm seeing things." He shifted back into gear and pressed on. But the deeper he drove into Route 77, the stranger the road became. The yellow dividing lines seemed to shimmer, and shadows danced along the roadside, moving unnaturally. Then he saw it. A rusted 18-wheeler was parked along the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. It looked decades old, its paint peeling, and its windshield covered in grime. A trucker stood beside it, waving. Jake slowed down and rolled down his window. "Need a hand?" The trucker's face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow. "Don't stop. Don't ever stop on this road. A chill ran down Jake's spine. Before he could respond, the man stepped back, and the truck behind him flickered like an image on a broken TV screen. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Vanished. Jake stomped on the accelerator, his breath ragged. He needed to get off this road. But as he sped forward, something even worse happened. The odometer was running backward. He blinked. 40 miles to the next town. Then 39. Then 38. But the numbers weren't decreasing like they should. They were reversing, going back up. He was somehow driving in the wrong direction, yet the road hadn't changed. Panic set in. He checked the map on his GPS. It was blank. Just static. Then his radio crackled again. It was the same voice from before, but now it sounded distant, distorted. Told you to turn back, too late now. His headlights flickered. The engine sputtered. And then, he saw them. Lined up along the side of the road were dozens of trucks, ancient, rusted, covered in grime. And inside, he saw the drivers. Pale, wide-eyed, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Their hands were gripping their steering wheels, but their bodies were lifeless. Jake screamed and swerved, his tires screeching. The world spun, and the truck skidded to a halt. When he looked up, Route 77 was gone. He was somewhere else. A fog-covered highway with no signs, no lights, no escape. His radio crackled one last time. Welcome to the bloody truck route. The air grew thick, making it harder to breathe. The road ahead twisted in unnatural ways, shifting as if alive. Jake gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. He had no choice but to drive forward. Minutes passed like hours. A shadow darted across the road, too fast to be human. His headlights caught glimpses of movement, figures standing along the roadside, watching him. Their faces were blurred, but he could feel their hollow gazes piercing through the darkness. Suddenly, his truck lurched violently to the left, as if something had yanked it off course. He struggled to regain control, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A low whisper filled the cab, though the radio was silent. Turn back, turn back, turn back. Jake clenched his jaw. There was nowhere to turn back to. The road behind him was swallowed by an impenetrable void. Then, the truck ahead of him appeared. It was the same rusted 18-wheeler from before, but now, it was directly in his path, blocking the way. Its headlights flickered erratically, and in the driver's seat, he saw the gaunt-faced trucker again. Only now, the man was grinning. Jake slammed his foot on the brakes, but his truck didn't stop. The road beneath him felt like ice, slick and uncontrollable. The grinning driver lifted a skeletal hand and pointed at him. The engine roared on its own, the gas pedal sinking beneath Jake's foot against his will. The truck accelerated, barreling straight toward the rusted rig. Just as the impact seemed inevitable, a blinding red light filled his vision, and everything went dark. Jake awoke with a start. His truck was parked at an empty gas station, engine idling. His hands were still locked onto the wheel, his heart hammering in his chest. He glanced at the odometer, 40 miles to the next town. His radio crackled. Told you to turn back. The demonic truck driver. The desert highway stretched endlessly into the night, the only source of light coming from the full moon above and the dim headlights of passing vehicles. James Carter had been driving for hours, his eyelids growing heavy as his old sedan rumbled down the empty road. He was on his way to Los Angeles for a fresh start, having left behind a failed marriage and a life that no longer felt like his own. A glance at the gas gauge made his heart sink. He was nearly on empty. Relief washed over him when he spotted a neon sign ahead, flickering in the darkness, "Last Stop Gas and Diner." He pulled into the station, the crunch of gravel beneath his tires the only sound breaking the silence. The station looked deserted, save for a single massive 18-wheeler parked at the far end of the lot. James stepped out, stretching his legs as he scanned the surroundings. The diner's interior was dimly lit, with a lone waitress wiping down the counter and a scruffy-looking cook flipping burgers on a greasy grill. The gas station's attendant, a wiry old man with deep-set eyes, leaned against the pumps, smoking a cigarette. Fill it up? The old man asked, his voice raspy. Yeah, thanks, James replied. As the attendant nodded and set to work, James wandered into the diner for some coffee to keep himself awake. Inside, he took a seat at the counter and ordered a black coffee. As he sipped, a deep, rumbling voice made his skin crawl. You driving alone this late at night? James turned to see a hulking man sitting at a nearby booth, his massive frame barely contained by the seat. He wore a trucker's cap pulled low over his eyes, and his leather jacket looked worn and cracked. His hands, large, veiny, and covered in grime, clutched a steaming cup of coffee. Yeah, James answered cautiously. Heading west. The trucker grinned, revealing yellowed, uneven teeth. Dangerous stretch of road out there. Lot of folks disappear driving at night. James forced a chuckle. Yeah. What, like aliens or something? The trucker's grin widened. Not aliens. Something worse. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. Ever heard of the Black Rig? James shook his head. The waitress stopped wiping the counter and glanced at them, her face pale. They say there's a truck out there, the man continued, a big, black 18-wheeler with no plates. It rides the highways at night, looking for passengers. James raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a ghost story. The trucker chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Ghosts are harmless. This thing, it's a hunter. James scoffed and tossed some cash on the counter. Thanks for the story. The waitress caught his arm as he stood. Be careful out there, she whispered. If you see it, don't stop. James gave her a puzzled look but nodded before heading back to his car. The gas attendant had finished, and James pulled onto the highway, shaking off the eerie encounter. Miles passed in silence. The road was deserted, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. He turned up the radio to break the monotony, but static filled the speakers. Frowning, he switched it off. Then he saw the headlights in his rearview mirror. At first, they were distant. But within seconds, they were blinding, flooding his car with an unnatural white glow. A massive 18-wheeler loomed behind him, black as the night, its grill gleaming like the teeth of a predator. James' heart pounded as the truck blared its horn, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very air. He gripped the wheel, accelerating. But no matter how fast he went, the truck stayed on his tail. Then it moved to pass him. As it pulled alongside him, James risked a glance. The truck's windows were impossibly dark, and yet he felt something staring at him. The cab was massive, its surface rippling as though it were alive. Symbols were etched into the metal, glowing faintly with an eerie red light. And then he saw the driver. The figure in the cab was not human. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its eyes burned like embers. Its mouth stretched into an inhuman grin, jagged teeth glinting. A clawed hand gripped the wheel, its fingers too long, its nails sharp and black as obsidian. James swerved, his tires screeching against the asphalt. The truck let out a roar, its horn blending with a monstrous growl. His car skidded off the road, tumbling into the desert as the world spun into chaos. Darkness swallowed him. When James came to, he was lying beside his wrecked car. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the sand. The highway was empty, no sign of the truck, no sign of the driver. Dazed, he stumbled back onto the road. A distant sound caught his ear, the low, rumbling laughter of an engine, watching, waiting. The legend was real. And it was still hunting. The nightmare behind the truck. On deserted highways where the only companions are the stars and the endless hum of the engine, whispers circulate among truckers, whispers of a phantom rig known as the Nightmare. According to lore passed from one weary driver to another, there exists a truck that appears when the night is darkest, its silhouette emerging from the mist as if summoned by tragedy and regret. Some say it's a cursed relic of an accident long forgotten, others insist it is the harbinger of doom for those who dare travel the lonely roads after midnight. Alex Mercer had driven countless miles under the indifferent glow of streetlights and moonbeams. A seasoned long-haul driver with a reputation for steady nerves and meticulous routine, he had never paid much heed to ghost stories. For a man whose life was measured in miles and diesel fumes, tales of spectral trucks were nothing more than campfire yarns spun by jittery colleagues during long, lonesome shifts. Yet, as autumn settled over the countryside and the nights grew longer, Alex found himself navigating an unfamiliar stretch of highway, a ribbon of asphalt winding through dense, whispering woods and barren fields. That fateful evening, the air was unusually still. The radio sputtered with static between stations, and even the familiar drone of his rig seemed to carry an undercurrent of disquiet. Alex's eyes, weary from the endless horizon, caught something peculiar in his rearview mirror, a dark shape receding into the distance, its form larger than any ordinary truck. Dismissing it as a trick of fatigue, he pressed on, unaware that the nightmare had only just begun. As the miles slipped by, the inexplicable presence began to haunt him. The mirror, once a reliable gauge of trailing vehicles, now seemed to distort reality. Every time Alex glanced over his shoulder, the silhouette of that mysterious truck appeared a little closer, as if the phantom were stalking him, inching forward with every mile, defying the natural laws of distance and speed. The truck itself was a relic, a vintage model with peeling paint and rust that shimmered like spilled blood under the moon's pale gaze. Its headlights, though long extinguished, flickered with a spectral luminescence that sent shivers down Alex's spine. He tried to attribute these visions to an overactive imagination in the isolation of the endless road, yet then came the whispers, soft murmurs barely audible over the engine's rumble, carrying a name on the wind and a plea lost in static, growing steadily more insistent with each mile. Needing a reprieve from the mounting terror, Alex sought refuge at a solitary roadside diner nestled at the edge of a forgotten town. The neon sign buzzed intermittently, casting flickering shadows on the cracked pavement. Inside, the diner was a relic of better days, a haven where truckers gathered to share stories and warm their chilled bones over bitter coffee and pie that tasted of nostalgia. In a hushed conversation with an old-timer named Gus, Alex learned more of the legend. Gus's tired eyes and resolute tone revealed that many had encountered the nightmare truck. "They say it's not just a truck," Gus whispered, leaning forward as if sharing a dangerous secret. "It's a prison on wheels, a vessel for souls that never found peace after a terrible accident on this very road decades ago. Once it chooses you, it's there, lurking in your mirror, waiting to pull you into its endless sorrow." The diner's patrons exchanged knowing glances, each bearing scars from their own brush with the supernatural. Yet as the clock ticked past midnight, the murmurs faded into a heavy silence, and Alex sensed that his journey would soon take a darker turn. Back on the highway, the night grew oppressive. The familiar landmarks of roadside billboards and distant farms vanished beneath a cloak of impenetrable fog. The ghost truck, once a distant figure, now dominated his rearview mirror, moving in a rhythm that defied physics, sometimes accelerating as if eager to catch up, at other moments hovering ominously alongside him. The radio, his only lifeline to sanity, crackled with fragmented broadcasts of static interspersed with eerie, almost indecipherable voices reciting cryptic phrases. Alex's hands tightened around the steering wheel as every instinct screamed to flee. Yet the relentless presence of the nightmare rendered him a prisoner on a seemingly endless road. In the midst of this surreal chase, time itself began to warp, minutes stretched into hours, and reality blurred with the fevered visions of a mind under siege. In fleeting moments, as the truck's darkened silhouette loomed in his peripheral vision, Alex saw reflections of his own fears, regrets, and memories of lost loved ones, ghostly echoes from a past he had tried desperately to bury. Determined to break the relentless cycle, Alex slowed his rig and pulled over at a narrow, deserted stretch of the highway. Under the stark light of a solitary street lamp, he stepped out into the cold, damp air. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic echo of the truck's engine, a sound that now pulsed with malevolent intent. As he stood there, the ghost truck materialized before him. Its massive frame, wrought with decay and sorrow, was illuminated by an otherworldly glow. The air around it vibrated with an almost palpable tension, as though it were the very heart of a long-forgotten tragedy. Mustering every ounce of courage, Alex approached. Each step was heavy with dread and determination. The truck's door creaked open on its own, revealing an interior shrouded in darkness. Inside, the seats were worn and torn, and faint stains, remnants of past horrors, spattered the walls. Stepping into the vehicle, memories flooded his mind, flashes of a terrible accident from years ago, a moment when he had narrowly escaped death. Had he always been destined to evade the inevitable, or had fate chosen him for a more sinister role? In the dim glow of his rig's dashboard light, he discovered a faded photograph tucked into the glove compartment, a picture of a young family, eyes full of hope and life, and a truck that looked eerily similar to the apparition before him. The revelation struck him like a bolt of lightning. The nightmare was not an external force but a manifestation of unresolved guilt and a past marred by tragedy. Alex realized he had been more than a bystander in that accident. His silence had, in a way, condemned others to eternal suffering. The shattering truth left no room for denial. The truck's spectral presence had been a relentless reminder of the burden he had carried for years. Amid the haunting echoes of sorrow and regret on that desolate stretch of highway, Alex faced an ultimate choice: continue fleeing from the past or confront it head-on. In that moment, a spectral figure emerged from the truck's shadow, a woman with eyes as deep and mournful as the night itself. Her voice, heavy with the weight of countless lost dreams, intoned, "You cannot outrun what you have done, Alex. The road you travel is paved with the echoes of those you left behind." Her words were not an accusation but a sorrowful lament, a plea for the truth to be acknowledged. Overwhelmed by guilt and the intensity of the spectral encounter, Alex sank to his knees on the cold asphalt. The boundaries between past and present blurred as memories of the accident, his silence, his inaction, swirled around him like a maelstrom of despair. In that heart-wrenching moment, he understood that the nightmare was both his curse and his chance for redemption. Only by accepting the darkness within him could he hope to break the cycle that had tormented him and so many others. Gathering what little strength remained, Alex closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. He whispered apologies into the silent night, addressing the lost souls whose voices now filled the air. In response, the ghost truck's form shimmered, its once menacing outline softened into a semblance of peace. The spectral woman reached out a translucent hand, guiding him toward a long-forgotten path, a way to atone for his past transgressions. When dawn broke over the horizon, a soft light crept over the road, dispelling the lingering shadows of the night. Alex was later found by a passing motorist, sitting quietly on the side of the highway, his eyes distant yet strangely serene. He would recount his encounter as a nightmarish vision, a final reckoning with the ghosts of his past. Many doubted his tale, dismissing it as the ravings of a man broken by grief and guilt, yet those who had experienced the loneliness of the open road knew that the highway held secrets far darker than any mortal sin. The legend of the nightmare truck endured, whispered among truckers and late-night wanderers, a timeless reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that sometimes redemption comes only when one dares to face the darkness lurking behind the headlights. In every lonely stretch of asphalt, where the cold wind carries the sorrow of forgotten souls, the nightmare waits, ever patient, ever hungry, and ever ready to claim another lost traveler.